All right, everyone. Thanks for joining. So this is the webinar on investing in second position notes. So I'm Dan Deppen and joined here by expert in seconds, Sherman Arnowitz. Do some quick introductions here before we jump into it. So again, my name is Dan Deppen. So I run Fusion Notes, which I founded about 6 or 7 years ago now. And my focus has been exclusively in first position residential notes today. So that's why I'm excited to be joined by Sherman, who's the expert in seconds, which I haven't really delved into too much yet. I started my career as a mechanical engineer in the aerospace industry and then moved on to the tech industry as a product manager, but my passion has really been about real estate and investing in notes. So Sherman, I'll hand it over to you to talk a little bit about yourself, let folks know who you are.
Like I'm looking in the mirror.
Yeah.
My name is Sherman Arnowitz, and I've been investing in the distress residential second mortgage side for over 26 years now. And it's been a hell of a journey. It's been great. It's been exciting. It's always learning, and it's been very lucrative. And so when Dan and I got together and decided that we should team up on this, I thought it was a match made in heaven. And tonight we're going to wet your whistle and educate you a little bit more on the world of seconds and how to make money.
Cool. Sounds good. So this is going to be more of an open discussion where I'm going to pick Sherman's brain, but we're going to talk about basically how do you invest in seconds? What are they exactly? How does that work? Some of the pros and cons of doing seconds versus first, and then some of the other nuances that we need to think about when investing in seconds, and then how they price differently from first, and also how you foreclose from second position. And then for the folks who hang around till the end, I'll have something else that I think will be worth waiting for then. So I'll stop sharing because we don't really need slides for the rest of it. But I guess just, kicking it off, Sherman, what exactly is a second position note for people that may have only done first or may not be familiar with notes at all that much yet?
Well, I have to, if you don't mind, I have to take 2 minutes and just kind of give you the story that I tell of how I got into the second mortgage space.
Sure.
And when I graduated college, my college roommate, we'll give him a different name, we'll call him Dave. He called me up and he asked to borrow $5,000. And he said, it's a real estate deal. Give me the $5,000. I'm only going to need it for 30 days. And I'll give you back $7,500. So you'll make a $2,500 profit. And so I gave him the money. And 15 years went by. So on one hand, I lost a good friend, but 15 years goes by and I get an envelope in the mail and I open it up and it's a certified check for $5,000 out of nowhere and a phone number on the back. And so I call up my friend. And of course, the first thing I say is, where's the interest? And he starts telling me we catch up and he starts telling me this world that he stumbled into. And the world that he stumbled into is like, you have first residential mortgages and the good thing about the first is you're in first position and then you have the second mortgages and people decide they want to redo their kitchen or they want to put a swimming pool in or whatever the reason, they take out a second. I was clueless at the time about what was going on or what a second mortgage. I certainly knew about first because I had them. But he started explaining, then people take out these second mortgages. And then if something happens where they can't make payments to the bank on their seconds, the banks are going to try. But at some point, it's really not worth pursuing. And so he said, that's where we come in. And we're investors that will buy these notes from the banks that they don't want them. They would rather write them off than do anything else. And so at the time I was ending a partnership with my brother, and it was just, again, perfect timing. And my college roommate, he started showing me the ropes about what second mortgages are and how they work. And before you know it, we were making a lot of money. And at one point he said to me, look, it's time. I can only teach you so much, and you have to do this by yourself. And at that point, I had a decision to make. Do I start doing this by myself, or do I start creating a fund and more funds and getting more investors in it? I certainly knew how much money I personally had to do it. And there's, that's a decision that everyone out there really has to make, how they want to make this money. Do they want to make the money that it's just supplemental income, or do they want to make a career change and really turn this into something? And so that was something that I had to think about. And ultimately, I made a decision to create funds and to get people to invest. And the challenge at the beginning was, well, who's going to trust me? They don't know me, and I don't have any I don't have any history. I don't have anything that I could show them. And I remember my first meeting, it was my high school buddy and some of his lawyer friends. And I was doing my dog and pony show. And at the end of the show, they went around the room and they're like, okay, put me down for 50, put me down for 100, put me down for 75. And inside my head, I'm thinking, and I want to scream, like, are you sure you guys know what you're talking about? You really don't want to, I don't know anything. And so it was that doubt that I had. And it ended up being great. I remember it was 37 loans, and we did really, really well with those loans. So it's always, you're only as good as your last fund or note that you've purchased. And so for everyone that's out there that is curious about getting into the world of seconds, certain things that I would say over the years that I've come across is the main difference between a first and a second. With the first mortgage, and Dan, jump in anytime you want and call BS if you want. But the main difference is that with a first mortgage, it's a first mortgage. You're in first position. And so when you're doing your due diligence, you're really just mainly concerned with the property value of the home and how much you can get this loan for. And so it's fairly easy mathematics to say, okay, if I buy it at 90 cents on the dollar, 80, 85, whatever you're going to buy it on the dollar, and if the shit hits the fan, what's my exit strategy? And so you really don't have that many exit strategies, because when you're buying so high, number one, the condition of the loan is going to dictate where you are and how much you're going to spend on that loan. With second mortgages, they're obviously in the second position, and they're right behind the first mortgage. You could also have a third mortgage, we found, and once we found the fourth mortgage, but the second mortgage is identical to the first mortgage. It's secured. We can foreclose on it, just like the first can foreclose on it as well. The main difference is that with a second mortgage, you're going to pay less money. And because you're paying less money, there's more exit strategies. There's more strategies that you have. When I first started out 25, 26 years ago, we were buying second mortgages for 6, 10, 12 cents on the dollar. All of a sudden, the economy kind of changed, and we were buying them at 30 cents on the dollar. But even when we were buying them at 30 cents on the dollar, there was still a lot of equity that it made sense that we could buy it at 30 cents on the dollar. So because we're buying smart and we're buying at a level that we know we can minimize the risk, we can talk to the borrowers. And we can kind of get into that a little bit later, because the process of getting to the borrowers and what you can expect the attitude of the borrowers to be is not pleasant when you pick up the phone. You know, like everybody else, I don't have a second mortgage. What are you talking about? Don't bother me. But the reality is that if I'm paying 30 cents on the dollar for a second, and that second is $30,000, and so I'm paying 30 cents, so I'm paying $9,000 for this loan. There's a lot I can do, because number one, I paid $9,000 on a $30,000 loan. And let's say that the second mortgage, the monthly fee, let's say is $600 a month. Well, there's a lot I can do. And depending what happens when I speak to the person, it's the only thing I'll add is that beyond that, because it's been a year, 2 years, 3 years since they've made payment, all that past due balance is accumulating. And so we call that past balance and late fees, we call that gravy. Okay. We put it aside. We're not really going to focus on it just yet. We're going to focus on the main. He owes us $30,000. We paid $9,000. It's $600 a month. Hey, borrower, I got you.
So when you say you're paying like some percentage of the balance, that's the unpaid balance.
Correct.
Does that include the gravy part, or?
No, it doesn't.
No.
When you make a bid, when you see a spreadsheet and it says, I've got in Denver, Colorado, John Doe, here's the address, here's the note or the create date, here's the last payment they made, here's the next payment that's due, here's the maturity date, here's the interest rate, and here's the monthly. Okay. And so the current unpaid principal, maybe they started out at 30,000, and maybe for 5 years they were doing great, and then something happened. And so all of a sudden, here we are 2023, and let's say that the note was originated in 2015, you know, well, for a couple of years they were doing great, and then they stopped. Okay. And so you have a gap, and obviously someone who bought it before me, maybe they tried and they weren't successful. And so the last pay date was 2020. Okay, so here we are 2023, they haven't paid in 3 years. That past due balance, the late fees attached to the past due balance, that's gravy. We put it aside. What we want to do when we speak to that borrower is, hey, Dan, I just bought your note. You owe me $27,000. What's going on? How can I help? People have different strategies. I know some investors that have the strategy of screw it. I'm sending my welcome letter out, and then I'm suing. I'm going to foreclose right away.
Right out the gate.
Right out the gate. It's just going to be a big atom bomb, and that's going to get the attention. I was never like that. My strategy was, we'll get there. If we have to get there, we'll get there, and then we'll make a decision. Let's see what we can do. And so a lot of times we speak to the borrower, and they're like, once you convince them and show them that you legally, rightfully own the note and that they owe that money, there's silence, you know, just dead silence. And then it's, how can I help you? That's the strategy that we wanted to implement. They've been shit on so much. How can I help you? Well, I can't afford $600 a month. Okay, well, what could you afford? Well, I could afford $200. All right, I don't know that I could get you $200. I'll have to check with my investors. And we never really let them know that I am the investor. I have to check with my investors, okay? But I'm on your side. Hey, Dan, good news, spoke with the investors. We can do this at $225 a month. We're going to put you on a temporary payment for 6 months to see how you do. We'll do it at $225. Now, let's say that their monthly was $450, okay? Keep in mind, the last pay date was January 2017, let's say, okay? Well, I get them to sign the temporary payment agreement, and all of a sudden, here it is December. So January of 2024, I get $225. Okay. Now I apply that 225. I can't apply it as a whole. I'm gonna put that 225 in reserve. Okay. Because they didn't pay me a full payment. They only paid half of it. So I'm going to put that 225 in reserve. February comes along. I get another 225. Well, I got 225 that came in and I got 225 in reserve. That's 450. I have a full payment. Now I can apply the full payment and I'm going to move that last pay date from January 2017 to February 2017. You don't really, when you buy loans from other people, if the last pay date is 5 years, 7 years, 8 years away, before, I don't really like, I want to keep that date. Some investors will say, okay, last payday was 2017, it's 2023. That extra juice, that extra gravy that I have, I'm gonna calculate that. And that $30,000 loan is now $42,000. But you say to the borrower, hey, you're all caught up. So you owe me $42,000, but you're all caught up. So let's get going on making those payments. What I would rather do is say to the borrower, the mindset is that these borrowers haven't been making payments since the last payday. Could be a year, 2, 3, 4, 5. They don't owe, in their head, they don't owe a second mortgage. So the first thing we need to do is just get them to make a payment. All right. One little trick that someone taught me, we have the statute of limitations. Okay. Depending on the state, it's so many years per state. The trick I was taught is if you can get a borrower, let's say the statute is 7 years and here it is 6 years, and I call them and I go, look, you owe me $500. Tell you what I'll do. Give me $100 today, and I'll count that as a full month as an incentive. Once you receive any payment from the borrower, it resets the statute of limitation calendar.
So now that gives you time.
So
if
now
you
I
want to
got
start
another
a foreclosure later, you've got
now I got another 7 years.
years. Yeah.
Okay, because he paid me something. So that's a little trick that we do. But getting back to, I want to get this borrower paying, and I want to get him in the mindset that every month he's going to do it. And so we've done programs where we say, look, here's what you owe me, and here's your past due balance and your late fees, and that equals $6,000. We've done programs that say, for every 6 months that you don't miss a payment in your own time, I'm going to knock $250 out off your past due balance. So throw that carrot in there. Another thing we do with that $6,000 of past due balance, gravy, and late fees is, Dan, tell you what I'll do. For every dollar that you pay of this $6,000, I'll match it. If you put up $500, I'll put up $500. And so we can take away $1,000 off of that past due balance and late fee. So basically you're getting a 50% discount on anything that you pay. We use that gravy as a carrot to motivate. Right?
And even if you're giving them, even if you're matching and you're basically taking 50% of just the gravy, you're making a lot of money because you may have paid 30% of the unpaid balance and essentially zero for the gravy part.
We don't pay on the gravy.
Right.
We pay nothing on the gravy. We just pay on the actual, what's the unpaid principal balance. That's it. And so I don't want people out there thinking, oh, I'm going to get that gravy. There's a lot of times you do not get that gravy. All right. And I look at it, the visual that I look at is buying seconds is like one gigantic swimming pool. And so in that swimming pool, I tell people, if you buy 5 notes, 50 notes, or 500 notes, here's generally what's going to happen. Out of the 5 notes, 2 of them, you're going to get performing. It might not be at the $700 range, but it doesn't really matter because you didn't pay $700 worth for that loan a month. Okay. So if this guy was paying $700 and you got him to pay $300, that's a win. Okay. And I'm going to digress a little bit because it's a win because I'm putting him on a temporary payment plan. And I'm saying, I know you owe me $700 a month. I'll do it for $300 for 6 months. And if everything works out and you're good, we'll do a loan modification after 6 months. So now I have 6 months at $300 a month, and he's done great. And now I say, hey, Dan, tell you what, we're going to do a loan modification. And what I'm going to do, there's different components to this loan modification. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take your 11% interest rate that you had, and I'm going to bring it down to 8%. And you play around before you call them up. Maybe it's 8.5,
Yeah.
maybe 8.7. But I'm going to bring it down. So we're going to bring your interest rate down. Your maturity date, this loan supposedly would have matured in 2023, but because you didn't make payments, we're going to go out to 2030. So now we're going to extend the maturity date. We're going to lower the interest rate. And so what we're trying to accomplish is if he was paying $700 a month for this loan, and I said 300, the goal here is I want to get that 300 up to about 400, maybe $450 a month. How am I going to do that? I'm going to lower the interest rate. I'm going to extend out the maturity date. And now the last thing that we have is, what are we going to do with this past due balance and late fee, Dan? You got $6,000 in that kitty. My investors need you to do something with that. Tell you what, Dan, if you can give me $2,000 within the next 30 days, I'll wipe out 4,000 of that. So you'll only owe me 2,000. The 2,000 we'll put on the back of the loan. At 20 years that I extended it, or 15 years I extended it at 8%. And so that's the gravy that you're going to play with. Hey, if you can't afford $2,000, tell you what, give me 1,000 and I'll knock off $3,000. And so you owe me 3,000. We'll put that on the back end of the loan. And so now you're going to end up paying me $450 a month, and you're current. And that's what we do with the loan modification. So that's why at the very beginning, when I say out of 5 loans, 2 of them are going to start performing. It doesn't really matter at what level they're performing, because down the road, we're going to come up with these strategies to make them. Now, all of a sudden, I have a loan that did 6 months at 300, and now there's a loan modification at 8%, and they're making payments of $450 a month. Well, if I get that going and I season that for a year or 2 years, let me put it out there in the marketplace. So remember, I paid $9,000 for that loan. Well, I already got 6 months times 300, and I got 24 months times 450. So now 2.5 years go by, and I go, let me put out there a market and see what I can get. Well, now you're putting out there a performing second mortgage that you'll probably get $15,000, $17,000 for that, maybe $18,000 for that on a 30,000 or whatever is left of the unpaid principal balance. Those are the strategies that you can do with a second because of the price point that you're buying that you cannot do with the first mortgage.
Right. And at that point, like if those 2 out of 5 are winners in that way, the other 3, you're probably already ahead of the game, even if you.
So let's talk about the other 3.
Yeah.
I could do a little shadow puppets.
Yeah.
The other 3, one of them is going to screw up. Maybe they were making payments to the first, they were ignoring the second, and then all of a sudden we see the first foreclosed on them. No matter what we did, we lost it. The first foreclosed, no money left over, we're done. We have 2 that are paying, 1 that's done. The 4th one that we have, hey, Sherman, I don't want to have a second mortgage anymore. All right, let's take a look at it. You owe me $25,000. There's past due of $6,000. That's $31,000. So now I'm including that gravy because he wants to get rid of his second mortgage. So it's 25 plus 6. You owe me $31,000. Tell you what, I spoke to the investors, and if you can get me $27,000 within 30 days, we'll knock off the rest and give them a percentage. And you start negotiating that. So 2 are performing, 1 dead, 1 we got to pay off for a short sale. And the 5th one, it's a wild card. It could be any one of these. And whether you're dealing with 5 loans, 50 loans, or 500, the reality is all those I'm throwing into the swimming pool. Okay. This one was a dog. I lost money. What did you pay for it? I paid $8,000. You're at minus $8,000. Yeah, but this one was a short sale that I did with the guy. It was a payoff short sale, and I got $30,000. Okay, well, how much did you pay for it? $10,000. So it's $20,000 minus the 8,000. So now you're up 12,000. And you got these 2 guys that are performing, blah, 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 blah. You're just tossing that in the swimming pool. And at the end of the day, you should be between 20 and 35% return on your money.
Total averaged out. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're doing it right and it all comes out, you should be between 25 and 35%.
So it sounds like from what I'm hearing, it's kind of a numbers game. So we're going to go, we're going to do a bunch of these. Some of them are going to be home runs. Some of them are going to get sideways, but that's okay because it washes out.
Yeah, it's just it's a numbers game. And the most important thing is your due diligence. And the due diligence, when I started the conversation with you, Dan, I said, with first, you're really interested in the house, the cost of the house, and looking at the loan. In seconds, we're looking at the loan, we're looking at the house, and we're looking at the owner of the house, the borrower. We're looking at all of those. We're looking at what does he do for a living? We're looking at his credit report and digesting, what's going on with his credit report. We're trying to get a profile of this person. And it just becomes a numbers game. So the due diligence is ultra important because we want to see that profile and we want to think what if situations. Some people, when I had students, some people of the students would say, well, why would I want to buy a $5,000 where the unpaid principal balance is only $5,000? Well, number one, you're a student and we're practicing. So wouldn't you like to pay on 5,000 than a 30,000? My sweet spot is between $20,000 and $40,000 when I would buy second mortgages. But what I tell them on the smaller unpaid principal balance, number one, it's great to start, it's great to practice, but now put in the gravy. So that 5,000, if I'm going to pay on the 5,000, if I'm going to maybe pay $1,000 for that on the 5,000. Well, now all of a sudden, 1,000 on the 5,000, and now I'm looking at the last pay date, and all of a sudden that 5,000 is really $7,500 because of the past due late fees. So now it's $7,500. So in my conversation with the borrower, am I really going to entice him to say, hey, pay $117? Your monthly is $125 a month. I'm not really interested in $125 a month and just dealing with the accounting, of $125 a month forever. So the play is, Dan, you owe me $7,500. I'm going to make this easy for you. We have a deal of a lifetime program. And instead of $7,500, if you could get me a check for $5,000 within 30 days, you're done. You don't owe me a second mortgage. You'll never hear from me again. We'll file a satisfaction of mortgage with the county. We're done. Okay. And negotiate.
Yeah, and it sounds like your probability of getting a payoff is going to be higher on that smaller balance, right? It's easier for somebody to cut a check for 5,000 than
absolutely
50,000 or whatever it might be with a bigger one.
Absolutely. So if you pay 1,000 and you get 5,000, and just with that short period of time, you're making 4,000. And I don't want to tell your listeners that they're all going to go this way, because like I said, that 550 or 500 premise, there are going to be, I had students, and part of the deal with the students is they had to buy 5 notes, and we would mentor them on those 5 notes. And I did it as fairly as possible whenever I would buy, let's say, 50 notes. I would try to segregate them and divide them up at 5 notes apiece.
Mm-hmm.
I had 1 or 2 guys that all 5 performed. They were just unbelievable. Fantastic. I had 1 guy who called me up and he said, it's not going so great for me. And my stomach, I just can't, it's too much anxiety for me. And so we ended up taking his and selling them to other students. So it's not for everybody, but you have to be willing to look at this as, could you lose everything? I guess so. In 26 years, that's never been a situation with me. I remember 1 loan we bought in New Mexico, and we tried forever to get this guy. And one day we received a phone call from the DEA, Drug Enforcement Association.
Mm-hmm.
They said, we have a little problem. The gentleman who owns the house purchased the house with drug money. So we're going to have to confiscate the house. And so I'm like, all right, well, let me give you my address where you can send a check. And he's like,
They're like,
no,
no.
sorry.
No.
We had one where, you call these people and you call them and you call them and you call them. Hey, I'm not going away. I'm here, buddy. I'm here. The worst case scenario, you look at it and you go, okay, could I have done anything better? No, I called them twice a week, 3 times a week, all different times. I sent them letters. I sent a door knocker. I'm at a point now where I can foreclose. Let me see if I can foreclose. We had a form, potential to foreclose form. And so the specific numbers that we needed, what's the house worth? Well, instead of going to Zillow, we would actually call up a real estate broker in that zip code and say, hey, could you do a drive-by and give me an idea of what this actually costs if you would sell it for within 30 to 60 days. And I promise you, if we're going to go through the foreclosure, we'll give you the exclusive. Okay. They come back and they go, yeah, it's worth $150,000. Okay, we pull a credit report, we look, what do they really owe the first? Okay, they owe the first $190,000. 190 they owe, the place is only worth 150.
Yeah.
Option 1's not looking good. Why am I going to pay $6,000 to $8,000 to an attorney? It's not looking good. At that point, now I have 2 options. Foreclosure's out. I could try to sell it, get some of my money back, or I could just sit on it and do nothing and see what happens. There's no right answer. I had 1 house, I called. 2 years later, I got a phone call from a mortgage broker. Hi, I represent Gary, and we need a payoff figure. He wants to sell his house. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Normally, very friendly and I want to negotiate. And at that point, I wasn't taking off a dime. And I call these little gifts happy birthday gifts. I don't know whether you have them in the first world.
Occasionally, yeah.
Yeah, every now and then you get these happy birthday gifts. And the deal with Gary, of that broker calling up, and I'm like, hallelujah. Okay, Gary, sit back. And of course, we have our $1,500 closing fee, and then we have our $1,800 this fee. So you have, but to your point, it's a numbers game, and you have to have the patience to learn. I always say if you're juggling those balls, there's 3 balls that you're juggling. Where am I going to find the loans? Where am I going to find the money to buy those loans? And where am I going to find the expertise? And for anyone that thinks that the expertise is something that you could just learn by reading online a couple of things, they're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk to people about that all the time. Like there's a ton of information out there, whether it's like webinars like this or podcasts or videos, whatnot. But the problem is it's not organized, right? Like it's all there, but it's hard to put it all together, and it's hard to find the specific answer to the specific question you have at a given time. That's what makes it challenging.
It's a process, and the industry keeps changing, and the statute of limitations, some people buy loans and their exit play, or one of their exit plays is, I'm going to be able to foreclose. And foreclosing is definitely an option. We chose not to do it. And I think for a couple of reasons. I'd like to think one of them is these people, and this is my own personal opinion, it's nothing to do with what's right or wrong. Hey, you know what? These people have been shit on enough, not worth it. Unless everything was aligned.
Mm-hmm.
I gave this guy every opportunity. I wanted to work with this guy. This guy wasn't returning my phone calls. He was being belligerent, didn't want anything. And there's equity, and okay, it makes sense. Even paying $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for a lawyer, it makes sense. Let's do it. So those are the ones. And so probably within the last 3 to 5 years, the big topic is, okay, foreclosure, statute of limitations. If you are going to foreclose, is it within the right period of time based on that statute of limitations? And do you have all the collateral material that you're going to need so that when you do go to court, the borrower's attorney knows exactly what to look for to make sure that every single T is crossed and every I dotted? Do you have that? And so that's changed over the last 5 years, because past 5 years, it really wasn't an issue. It was a little bit more of the Wild West, which was kind of nice, but now things change. And so when you are buying loans, part of that due diligence process, when you're looking at those spreadsheets, is to say, hey, what if? What if I do choose to foreclose? What's the collateral material look like? And what's the statute of limitation on this loan look like?
Yeah, and generally, like for me and first, it doesn't come to that, but I had an experience recently where I actually had to physically show up in court in Jackson, Mississippi. And my attorney went line by line through absolutely everything, all the collateral, and then called me to the stand, and like I had to go through it. And then I had to read through, I had to answer all the judge's questions about every column on a servicing report from Allied meant. It was crazy. That's the only time I've ever had it come to that, but it was nice to have all those T's crossed and T's crossed and I's dotted what I did. Otherwise, I might have lost out. So
And what happened? So you won?
so I won, and they just processed the eviction about a week and a half ago. Borrower wasn't home, actually left some cars behind, so I still got to figure out what to do with that, because it actually looked like pretty nice cars. So now in the process of figuring out exactly what I got and getting it sold. So
All right, well, let me know what kind of cars they got. All right, Dan, please.
I will. Yeah, I can send you
Oh,
some photos after this. I
yeah,
don't
hell
remember
yeah.
offhand what they were.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So one of the, someone just asked a question about statute of limitations. Each state has a different mandate that says the amount of time that you can go without the borrower making payments. The analogy that I would use, and each state is different, it's a matter of, if this guy made a payment, his last payment was in 2015, January of 2015. And here it is, 2023, so that's 8 years later. Well, if the statute of limitations from the last time this guy made a payment is less than 8 years, the statute of limitations has expired. Number one, the borrower has to know that. How are they going to know that in general? No, probably 95%, 97%. They're not going to know that if we're having a conversation about collecting money with them. Never have I gotten on the phone with somebody and they've said, I'm afraid not, Sherman, my statute of limitations, blah, 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 blah. Never happened. That's number one. If we're going to proceed to court to foreclose on them, you can bet their attorney is going to know to ask all the right questions. So that's what the statute of limitations. Sometimes it's based on the last payment made. Sometimes it's based on if I send a legal letter out. Let's say that the last payment that they made was on 2015, but I had a lawyer send it out in 2013. It's really from the time in some states that the lawyer sent out that demand letter. So each state is different. They have different factors and they have different time periods. And so that does become a factor when we're looking at loans to buy, that, hey, if you feel you're never going to foreclose, then it doesn't become an issue. If you feel that you might foreclose, then it does. It also depends what you're doing this for. If you're buying, like I just bought 8 loans and they're all under $3,000, the unpaid principal balance. Well, when I'm doing my due diligence, I'm not looking the what if. I'm not thinking the what if I'm going to sue them and foreclose on them, because why would I do that if the unpaid principal balance is so low? Yeah, I'm going to add the past due balance and late fees into it. But other than that, I'm not going to foreclose. And so that issue wouldn't be an issue for me.
Mm-hmm. One question I had, Sherman, was we said like a lot of times when you call borrowers, their first response is, I don't know who you are, I don't owe you money. How many of those are like they legitimately lost track of it and didn't know, or how many are like just in denial that they kind of knew this thing was looming out there and they were hoping nobody would call?
Yeah, I'd probably say 99%. They know.
Yeah.
They know what could possibly be an excuse for that 1%. I did have one person whose the husband passed away and the wife was like, I did not know he had a second mortgage,
Mm.
or there's a divorce, and I get in touch with the ex-wife, and the ex-wife says, hey, in the divorce settlement, he was supposed to take care of the second mortgage. And I say, that's great. If you can just email me that section in your divorce agreement, I'll take care of it. Most of the time, it's not
Yeah.
in the divorce agreement. But we want it to be as fair as possible. And the reality is that these borrowers haven't made payments. First, if I go back and be this old fuddy-duddy that can look at you and say, the banks created our business, your business and my business, of buying and managing non-performing mortgages. Because when we were in COVID, the banks, mandated by the government, who said, hey, banks, you need to work this out with your borrowers and you need to give them the ability to make arrangements. Okay. And if that was the case, you know, the big thing was most of the loans that we're buying were originated in the early 2000s. And then 2006, 7, and 8 happened, and our world turned upside down. And the debate during that crash was, one side was those banks should not have approved those borrowers because those borrowers couldn't afford. And so we want to point the finger at the bank and say, hey, bank, you're the bad guy. You were signing off on these deals. How is this guy can afford $1 million house, you know, based on what his salary is? But the other side of that coin is, hey, borrower, why would you do that? You knew damn well, you know, you're making $100,000 a year. How could you think that you could afford to live in $1 million house? So whoever wants to point fingers like that, we're in the situation that we're in. And had banks, you know, there's other countries I know in Spain, the government subsidizes the banks if the bank will work with the borrowers that are in trouble. And so for every dollar that the bank forgives or comes into some sort of program, the government's going to be able to subsidize the bank because they're doing that. Well, I got to have a very nice life for 25 years because of the banks, the banks didn't want, how easy would it have been for the bank to say, hey, Dan, I'm really sorry that you took this loan out for $25,000 and you paid 5 of it back and you lost your job and this and that. Tell you what I'll do, Dan. What we can do to get you back on your feet is for the next 12 months, why don't we put you on a payment plan of you only paying X dollars? They didn't want to do that. They very easily could have done that. And because they chose not, if they chose to do that, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation right now, right? But
Yeah,
because they chose to do that, here we are.
and it's tougher for those larger institutions. I've never worked for a bank, but I've worked for a handful of very large tech companies. And I think sometimes people don't appreciate the bureaucracy that goes on in those. Like one of
Right.
my advantages as a small player in this business is, as you were saying, I can just make decisions on the fly on what deal I want to accept or not accept or what I want to
Yeah,
offer. And I can go real
yeah,
fast. And I've had many conversations with borrowers where they were in a situation where they got behind either because of like divorce is a big one, medical bills, job loss, whatever. And then they're kind of afraid to make more payments because they're worried they're just going to be pissing it down a well and they can't talk to anybody from the bank. And they're actually like very relieved and happy when they can just talk to Dan and then we can put together a plan
yep,
and they get
amen.
back on track.
So, I remember so often people would say, as I would explain what I do for a living, and they go, oh, you kick people out of their homes? And I said, no, 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 just the opposite. I'm the guy that keeps people in their homes. And that's the reality. We have a question from David who's saying on the $3,000 unpaid principal balance loans that you buy, since you're not going to foreclose, does that mean that if you can't get them restarted, you just write off the loan? I would probably say, in with my experience, I will get probably 85 to 90% of those borrowers to pay. Maybe they're not going to pay all the gravy, but I can guarantee you I'm going to walk away from those 8 loans that I bought. And some of them, one of them's $500 unpaid principal balance. If it was total of, let's say it was $15,000, I think I paid $1,000 for the loans. So there's a lot of leeway in there. So I feel pretty confident on those low UPBs that I can get something because it's still a secured second mortgage. In the letter, maybe it's not the first, but it's the second letter. The first one that I sent out was, hey, here's the deal. I bought your loan. And this is what the unpaid principal balance is, plus the late fees, plus the past due balance, plus our $250 setup fee or what have you. And so that $500 is really $1,000. But look, if you can pay me within the next 30 days, $500, great, I'll wipe it clean. That's my main focus on that. If for whatever reason it doesn't work, I would try to sell them somewhere else. I don't think it's worth holding on to them. Again, I paid $1,000 on an unpaid principal balance of 15,000, and that's without the gravy. That's just a straight 15,000.
Yeah, very good. All right, so we're about 50 minutes in, so I'll kind of jump to the conclusion here. So Sherman, I know you've done a lot of education over the years in seconds. And so now we've taken your course and your content and materials and kind of repackaged it into a new course on seconds that I'm happy to introduce in the webinar. So it's called Building Wealth with Second Position Notes. We've already had some students that have been going through this in a beta version here recently. And Sherman, I can let you talk to this a little more because you know more about it. But when you approached me and we talked about this a while ago, I was just really impressed with like the depth and the detail that you went into. I have my own course on first, and it's really interesting how everybody has kind of their own style and
Mm-hmm.
approach. Like philosophically, like a lot of our stuff is very well aligned, but I really like the way you present the material and go into a lot of the detail, particularly around, we're talking about the paperwork and collateral and some of the due diligence processes that you have. So,
Yeah, I thank you for that. I remember getting into this business and saying to my a friend of mine who was in business with me for a little bit, but I said, I've never been in a business with more acronyms than
yeah,
this real estate mortgage business. And I kind of I was trying to be funny, but I really meant it. And part of me was believing that these people need to use these acronyms in order to make other people think that they're smart. One of the courses that I put together, my tagline was, "It's not rocket science." And that's what I want. That's what I wanted everybody when I was designing this, and it took over a year of three of us putting this together and putting it in a format of how I would want it to be explained to me. And really laid out in a way that it's not rocket science. And no one out there is smarter than me, smarter than you. Everybody has a talent. Out of all of these chapters, there's different components of what we do. If let's say that at times you need to be a psychologist with the borrower. At times you need to be a financial person with the borrower. At times you need to be a lawyer with the person. You're not going to be, rarely are you going to be all things, and your strengths are going to be all things. And it's, I used to say, it's more important to know what you're not good at than to know what you are good at. And so knowing what you're not good at, that's fairly easy. You're just going to, hire an attorney to handle that. You don't have to do it. Ask your accountant to do that stuff, not do it. And so that's how I really wanted to lay out the course, in that it's very numbers oriented. The due diligence, it's we have 3 or 4 chapters on due diligence, because obviously finding the right loan is important. Finding the right loan at the right price is even more important. And so, because down that road, those what if situations, we're always looking at those what if situations. And so we want to be prepared for those. And I rather do it at the beginning when I'm looking at the loans. As for due diligence, I'm looking, and in my head, what if? Those are the permutations that I'm looking at. I have another question here. Sherman, is the gravy recoverable in a foreclosure or just a UPB? Depending on the state that you're in, you can. There's other ways to trick the system. Some states, if there's, let's say, a 5-year statute of limitation, I want everybody to stay with me on this. If it's 2015 and it's a 5-year statute of limitations, and let's say it's 2020, and so the last pay date was 2015 and it's 2020. So that's 5 years. The statute of limitations expired. So it doesn't mean that I lose everything. It just means that I cannot charge beyond that 5-year period. So anything beyond 2020, I can't get, because the statute of limitations it expired. Now, what we can do is we can bump up the last pay date. So if the last pay date was 2015, we can tell the system, no, the last pay date was 2018. So now it's 2020, and the last pay date we are marking as 2018. Okay, we've only exhausted 2 years of the statute of limitations. In some states, you're able to move forward the date of the last pay date in order to accommodate falling within the confines of the statute of limitation.
Yeah, and I know we got some more question and answers. I just accidentally deleted one, but John had a question about whether I was going to email a link with all the information on the course. And yes, I'm going to do that after this. And doing this, we appreciate your wealth of knowledge. And so, I'm sure I'll get a bunch of questions after this too. So maybe we'll have you on again sometime
Great.
in the spring to do it some more.
Great.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'll send out a replay link and then I'll also send out, all the other information on the course afterwards. So, all right. Good night. Thanks everyone for
Great.
joining.
Good night, everybody. Thank you so much, Dan. Thanks again.
Yeah, no problem. All right.
Speak to you.